They thought I was just scratching the floor. But under that cold tile I found a hidden trap door, and behind it, a smell no dog should ever have to remember. That day, I didn't just uncover a secret. I found the children they thought no one would ever come looking for. I don't remember the exact moment my bones started to ache every morning, or when my hearing dulled to the low end of children's laughter. But I remember that Tuesday, the smell of it, the cold slice of something that didn't belong. See, I ain't some backyard mutt. I was born with purpose in my veins, trained with boots in the dirt and bullets in the air. I wore the vest. I walked beside Marines through broken streets in Kandahar, ears perked for IEDs, eyes sharp as glass. I saved lives. I watched brothers fall. And when they flew us home, when the medals stopped clinking and the orders dried up, they told me I had earned peace. But peace is a funny thing for a dog like me. You don't just hang up your instincts like an old leash. Sheriff Hank Delaney, he's the one who took me in. Not a young man anymore, but steady, kind, with those eyes that had seen enough not to flinch. He'd pat my head and say, "Still got more in you, don't you, Max?" And most days I did. Even if my back legs didn't move like they used to. Even if the kids in town petted me like I was just some old mascot with a badge. They didn't know what these paws had done, what they still remembered. That morning, we rolled into Willow Creek's Sunshine Patch preschool on a routine call. That's what Hank called it, routine. A neighbor had reported strange noises the night before, said it sounded like scratching, faint cries maybe, probably raccoons, or a possum stuck under the porch. But the moment I stepped out of that cruiser and my paws hit the gravel, something twisted in me. Not pain, not fear, something colder. Something that brushed against my ribs like a warning whispered from beneath the earth. The school looked like any small-town preschool you'd expect. White fence, bright flower murals, plastic tricycles on the lawn. Inside, it smelled of floor cleaner and apple juice. The kind of place a child should feel safe. The kind of place that sings lullabies through speakers and posts finger paintings on corkboards. But I could smell through that. I could smell the lie. We were greeted by Ms. Sherry, the director. Middle-aged, bright smile, clipboard in hand. She joked about how much kids love dogs, how some even tried to ride the last therapy doodle that came through. Hank smiled politely, reassured her this wouldn't take long, said we'd just take a look around. Probably just some plumbing noise, he added. But I didn't care about plumbing. My nose dipped to the floor, and without waiting for permission, I pulled left, past the front desk, past a hallway lined with coat hooks and cubbies, straight toward the nap room. That's when it hit harder. Underneath the lemon-scented disinfectant and washable markers was something else. A scent that clung low to the ground, like regret, like copper and wet paper. I paused at the edge of a colorful foam rug covered in cartoon clouds. My ears locked forward. I circled once, twice. Then I started to dig. My claws scraped against the laminate. Not playful, not curious, deliberate, urgent. "Max," Hank said behind me, tugging gently on the leash, his voice low with caution. "Easy, boy. What is it?" I let out a sound I hadn't made since the desert, low, guttural, the kind of growl that made soldiers stop in their tracks and grip their rifles tight. I wasn't angry. I was certain. Sherry stepped into the room, frowning at the sight of me clawing her floor. "He okay?" she asked. "He's trying to tell us something," Hank said, squatting beside me. He pulled at the rug, and there it was, faint but clear, the outline of a square, about the size of a large crate. The floor around it didn't match. Older boards, paint layered unevenly, rusted nails that hadn't been touched in years. "What's under here?" Hank asked. Sherry hesitated. "That area's always been a little uneven. Probably just old adhesive. Maybe a patch job from before we took over." Hank didn't answer her. He was looking at me. I was locked on the scene, tail stiff, nose inches from the wood. I knew what lived in that quiet space. Not the details, not yet, but I knew the shape of fear. I knew what it felt like in the air. "We're gonna take a look," Hank said. Sherry stiffened. "It's nap time in 10 minutes. If we could just—" "We'll be quick," he said. He pulled back the rest of the rug and tapped on the boards. Hollow. Thump, thump. That sound you feel in your chest more than hear. Lena, the assistant teacher, lingered in the doorway. Young, barely older than the high schoolers who bag groceries down at Sal's, pale face, tight grip on a juice cup. "You okay?" Hank asked. She nodded too fast. "Yeah, just startled. Your dog's loud." She didn't meet his eyes. I did. She knew. Children's voices floated down the hall, singing something about wheels on the bus. A boy peeked into the room, big brown eyes and sticky fingers. He walked right up to me, fearless. "That's where they go," he said, pointing to the floor. Hank crouched. "Who, buddy?" "The other kids," he whispered. "When they're bad, the lady says they need to learn." My hackles rose. I've heard many lies in my life, but nothing lies like a smiling room full of crayons and hidden screams. Hank stood up slowly. "No one leaves this building," he said. "Not until we know what this is." He radioed for backup. "Structural inspection, CPS." Another unit. I didn't move. I stayed right where I was. Over that square, tail flat, breath slow, ears tilted to every creak in the walls. I was trained to detect bombs, drugs, buried bodies. But this was something worse. Not something they buried to hide. Something they buried and walked away from. And I, an old dog with a fading coat and a 1,000-yard stare, had just found it. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I still could. They always told us to trust our training, to follow the scent, not the noise. Out in the field, noise gets you killed. Noise is a distraction. Scent doesn't lie. That smell under the nap room floor wasn't just mold or damp wood. It was layered, metallic, human, and something else I couldn't name, only remember. The kind of smell that sinks into your fur and follows you even after a hot rinse and a cold shake. I'd known it in alleys overseas. I'd known it in cellars where no one wanted to look. I knew it now. I stayed planted above the floorboard square as Hank made the call. His voice was calm, but I could hear the stiffness behind his words, the old tension he used to carry back when the badge weighed heavier and the world hadn't yet convinced him to go gentle with small-town crime. "This is Delaney," he said into the radio. "Requesting structural unit, CPS and a second patrol. We've got a potential anomaly at Sunshine Patch. Possible code violation. K9 alert on site." Sherry was pacing now, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were white. "Officer Delaney," she started, her voice brittle. "I really don't think this is appropriate during school hours. This is a well-rated, state-certified preschool. We follow every regulation." Hank didn't answer her. He was watching me again. I scratched twice. Claws to laminate. Sharp, fast. I wasn't doing it for show. He knelt beside me, lowering a hand gently to my back, right between the shoulder blades where the nerves twitch when something's wrong. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the square and growled. It wasn't a snarl. It wasn't fury. It was certainty. "Ms." Sherry stepped closer. "This is disruptive," she said, voice tight. "The children will be back from their morning songs in 2 minutes. We need that room." "We're not going anywhere," Hank said. A soft gasp came from the doorway. Lena, still holding that same paper cup of juice, knuckles trembling, her other hand gripping the frame of the door like she might fall through it if she let go. "You okay?" Hank asked, not unkind. She looked down. "Sometimes," she whispered. "I thought I heard something. Not always, but at nap time, under the floor." "What kind of something?" She looked like she might break, just saying it. "Like crying. Real quiet. Like someone was trying not to be heard." I turned toward her then, slowly, eyes level with her knees. My ears twitched, my body still. My nose caught something behind her voice, something like guilt wrapped in fear. Sherry jumped in. "Pipes," she snapped. "This building is old. You hear things. Heat kicks in, it knocks. That's all it is. These young girls get spooked too easily." Hank stood up. "Pipes don't cry." He stepped outside the room to give dispatch a more thorough update, and I stayed right where I was. The room had gone quiet, too quiet, a fake kind of silence that presses down on your ears. Lena stayed in the doorway, not blinking. Sherry backed toward the desk, fiddling with the clipboard in her hands, flipping pages that didn't matter. She didn't look at the floor. None of them did. The little boy with the big eyes came back, peeking around the edge of the hallway. No more songs in his voice, just a question on his face. "That's where the bad kids go," he whispered again. "Under there. Miss Corrigan says they come back better." I turned toward him. He wasn't lying. I heard Hank's boots return. He knelt again and started pulling at the seams in the floor. A crowbar came out of the cruiser. A few good pulls, and the panel groaned. The air that came out hit me first. Stale, heavy, carried things with it. Dust, yes, but also something older. Sweat, urine, blood. The kind of air that doesn't move unless it's pushed. We stared down into the hole. There was a wooden shaft, square and tight, about 6 feet deep, with a narrow ladder bolted into the side. A vent somewhere must have been open below. I felt the air move across my whiskers. "Jesus," Hank muttered. I whined softly. It wasn't fear, not yet, but I knew we were crossing into something bad. The others arrived fast. Blue uniforms, hard boots, a man with a clipboard from the building department who smelled like old coffee and plaster dust, a woman from CPS with a black folder and dark rings under her eyes. Lena sat on a plastic chair in the hallway, sipping her juice like it was the only thing keeping her hands from flying apart. Sherry tried to talk, but Hank cut her off. He walked the CPS agent into the nap room, showed her the hole, the scratch marks, the vented shaft. "This wasn't in your licensing paperwork," the CPS woman said to Sherry. Sherry hesitated, then opened her mouth with practiced shock. "I didn't know it was there." That was a lie. I knew it. So did Lena, but nobody said it. Hank turned to me, unclipped the leash. "You ready, boy?" I barked once, short and sure. We went down first, me leading, Paws careful on the narrow rungs, my body taut. The flashlight flicked side to side, catching dust, concrete, a broken toy car near the base of the ladder. The space was maybe 10 by 10 feet. No windows, no light except what we brought. The walls were blank. The air was thick with mold and stillness. I moved slow, circling, nose low. There were sleeping bags spread thin across the floor, child-sized. A plastic sippy cup, food wrappers from brands made for toddlers. One of the walls had scratches, shallow, then deeper, then shallow again, like tiny fingers trying to mark time. Then I found it. A small, rusted tin tucked into the corner, barely visible. I nosed it once, then barked. Hank came over and opened it. Inside, a pair of dolls, a worn headband, and a medical bracelet. He read it aloud. Ellie Mae, D.O.B., March 15th, 2020. He stood frozen for a beat too long. "This is recent," he said. When we climbed out, the light felt harsher. The room felt wronger. I sat by the trap door, watching everyone with that old stillness they taught us in training. Sherry was talking again, saying how children fall, get scraped knees, hide injuries, how a drop of blood doesn't mean anything. But I knew what blood meant. And that smell, that didn't belong to clumsy children. That belonged to silence, to things hidden. Hank turned to Lena. "Can I talk to you?" She nodded, eyes rimmed with red. "Has any kid ever gone missing?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes they'd be here on Monday, and not on Tuesday. No goodbye, no note, just gone." She shook her head slowly. "I thought maybe they unenrolled. That's what Sherry always said." I looked at her, and she looked back. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to be afraid, and fear has a smell, a bitter one. It gets in your throat. That's why I sat at that square in the floor, not blinking, not barking, just waiting. I knew there was more. I'd spent a lifetime finding what others couldn't see, and my chest was starting to rumble again, low and deep. And because this wasn't over, not even close. They say dogs live in the moment. Maybe most do. But not me. Not dogs like me. We're trained to remember. Trained to hold on. To the scent, the sound, the look in someone's eyes right before something breaks. I've held on to 1,000 such moments, and they've all lived in me, even when my body began to fail. That nap room had gone still, like the air inside was holding its breath. Sherry was pacing the hall now, speaking in sharp whispers to someone on the phone. The CPS agent stood off to one side, scribbling notes. Lena sat in a chair that looked too small for her, knees tight together, sipping what had to be warm juice by now. And I never left that square in the floor. It had been hours since I scratched it open. Hank had already climbed down once with the building inspector. The room below was now lit by a standing lamp powered through an extension cord, its light throwing crooked shadows up the shaft. The smell hadn't left either. It clung to me, low and heavy. I'd caught hints of it before in my working days, but never in a place with lullabies painted on the walls. Hank came over, knelt beside me, and ran his hand along my back. His fingers moved slower than they used to. I leaned into them, just a little. "They've got a team on the way," he said to me like I could answer. "Full forensics, trauma specialists. CPS is starting to pull names from the registry." I blinked once, slow. My tail didn't wag. Not yet. From the hallway, I heard the shuffle of little shoes. One of the teachers, one I hadn't seen before, was quietly moving children through the building. I caught a few glances, small eyes peeking around corners, lips pursed like they'd been told to keep it down. One boy clutched a toy truck like it was armor. We weren't invisible to them. Not anymore. A few minutes later, a quiet voice called out, "We've got something." It came from the base of the shaft. Hank stood and looked over the edge. "What is it?" "Blood," came the answer. "Old, but real." He looked back at me. I met his eyes. I didn't bark. I didn't need to. He went down again, slower this time. I followed, my paws careful on the ladder rungs, old joints clicking. When I reached the bottom, the light was brighter now, and the room didn't feel so much like a secret, but like a wound split open. The inspector, a wiry man named Griggs, pointed toward the wall. "Right there," he said. "We found it under the sleeping mat, dried, rubbed into the grain." Hank knelt and touched the spot with a gloved finger. He sniffed lightly, then frowned. Not paint, he muttered. Iron. Blood. I let out a low breath through my nose. They looked around the room again. There was a dented metal bucket in the far corner. Bits of food wrappers, most sun-faded. A sippy cup with a name scrawled in faded marker. Kayla. This isn't a storm shelter, Griggs said. And it sure as hell isn't up to code. The CPS agent had followed us down now. She crouched beside Hank. We've got a problem, she said. 2 kids on the roster, twins, were pulled out last year. No records of transfer, no official withdrawal. Parents were hard to reach. One moved states. The other just stopped returning calls. Hank looked over at me. Max, he said quietly. What do you think? I sniffed the blood again. Circled once. Sat. That's my signal. The one I was trained to give when something's real. Confirmed. Present. I don't sit for nothing. Back upstairs, things had changed. A second cruiser had arrived. A younger officer named Dana, new to town, still stiff in her uniform, stood by the main entrance keeping parents back. More calls had gone out. The local news hadn't shown up yet, but I could smell curiosity gathering like smoke behind the tree line. Lena stood near the door, her paper cup finally gone. She looked up when we came back. There's more, isn't there? She asked Hank. There's enough, he said. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Can I talk to you? Hank nodded and led her to a quiet corner by the supply closet. I followed, sitting close, but quiet. Lena's voice was hushed, shaky. I didn't know all of it, she said. I swear. But there were things, weird things, like the roll sheet. It was always partial. Sometimes I'd see a name once, and never again. We weren't allowed to ask about withdrawals. Sherry said it was private family stuff. Did you ever see the trapdoor? Hank asked. She nodded. Once, when I was helping clean after hours. I stepped on it, and it creaked. I asked about it. She told me not to worry. Said it was just where they kept old seasonal decorations. Hank gave her a look. That didn't seem odd to you? It did, she whispered. But I needed the job, and I didn't want to believe anything worse. I leaned closer to her. My nose caught it again, that bitter, sour edge of fear and guilt. But beneath that, something else. Sadness. She turned to me, her voice soft. I think they kept them down there when they cried too much, or didn't nap. Kids? Hank said. She nodded. I heard it once, like a muffled sobbing. It stopped before I could be sure. But now... She didn't finish the sentence. Later that evening, as the light shifted to a softer orange across the parking lot, I sat beside the trapdoor again. Hank stood just behind me, hands on his hips, staring at the square in the floor, like it might answer him. They painted over it, he said. Sloppy job. Didn't even bother with matching stain. I barked once. It wasn't for the trapdoor. It was for what I'd just caught. A scent. Faint, but present. Something else was down there. I moved toward the corner of the nap room, opposite the shaft. My nose dipped low, brushing against the baseboard. I sniffed twice, fast, then sat again. Hank followed. What is it? He tapped the floor. Hollow. We'd missed something. He called for Griggs, who came in with a small thermal wand. He scanned the wall, then frowned. Different heat signature, he said. That corner's got airflow behind it. Ventilation? Hank asked. Griggs shrugged. Or a second chamber. Hank didn't speak. I didn't move. We both knew what was coming. I'd felt it in the way the air shifted when I stepped into this place. This wasn't just one secret room. It was a network, a hollow built beneath a rainbow rug. And for the first time in years, I felt that old fire again, the kind that pulled me from burning wreckage and led me into tunnels filled with wire. Only this time, the enemy wasn't holding a rifle. It was silence. And I'd just broken it. The sun had started to dip behind the trees, turning the windows of the preschool into dull rectangles of amber light. From my spot in the nap room, I could see the shadows stretch longer across the floor, creeping toward that crooked square in the center, the same square I'd been guarding since morning. My legs ached, but I didn't move, not when Hank came back from the cruiser with new gloves, not when the CPS agent left for a phone call and came back with 2 more pages of missing kid reports. Not even when one of the teachers, Miss Jolene, I think, tried to offer me a bowl of water with a shaky hand. I didn't need water. I needed the truth to come up from under the floor. Griggs, the building inspector, arrived with a second team. They had saws, drills, and that kind of quiet determination people carry when they don't fully know what they're about to see. The kind that settles in your stomach and makes you move slower than normal. Not because you're lazy, but because you're hoping, deep down, maybe the next thing won't be worse than the last. But it was. They got the new panel up around 6:30. The light was dying fast, so Hank rigged 2 stand lamps while I paced the perimeter. As the new opening was revealed, I caught that smell again, closer now, more pungent. It wasn't just decay, it was blood. Old blood, sunk deep into wood. Dried, sticky. It didn't scream anymore, but it whispered plenty. Griggs called Hank over. "You'll want to see this," he said. I followed close. Hank dropped to one knee beside the newly uncovered space, a hollow pocket no deeper than a crawl space, but long, wide enough for a child to lie down, maybe 2. There was no ladder this time, just a dip in the floor. Stains soaked into the corners, darker than the wood around them. In one spot, there was a rust-colored smear trailing along the edge, finger length, crooked. Hank didn't speak at first. He just ran a light across it and breathed in slow. "I don't think this was just a hiding spot," he muttered. This was a place to forget someone." He stood up and turned to the CPS agent. "I want the full enrollment history from the past 3 years, every version of it. Don't trust the records we were given." She nodded and pulled out her phone. That's when the assistant, Lena, reappeared. Her hair was tied back now, and she'd washed her face, but the fear was still there, same as before, fresh under her skin like a bruise. "There's more," she said quietly. We all looked at her. "In the toy chest," she said. "In the nap room, by the window. I wasn't supposed to open it. Sherry told me it was off limits. But I think one of the kids left something in there. A bracelet, maybe. I remember them crying when it disappeared." Hank nodded. "Show me." We crossed the room again. I stayed just behind him, my nose twitching every few steps. The toy chest was painted yellow with a rainbow on the lid. Harmless at first glance. But as Lena opened it, I moved in close, and that scent hit me like a wall. Not blood this time, something more personal, child skin, dried tears, sickness, and something else I couldn't name, but I'd smelled in too many trauma rooms before. Hank rummaged through plastic figurines, a broken tambourine, a plush bear missing one eye. Then he found it, tucked under a stack of coloring books, a hospital wristband. He held it up to the light. "Caden M.," he read aloud. "DOB, February 3rd, 2017. Admit date, May 12th, 2022. He turned the wristband over. In messy crayon scribble, a sentence ran across the back. "Doggy will find us." The room went silent. Lena covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh God," she whispered. Griggs looked over from the open panel. "That's not on any current kid file." "No," Hank said. It wouldn't be. He turned to the CPS agent. Get me a list of all kids reported missing from this county, and every child who ever attended a daycare under Sherry's name or under this building's previous owners. I want everything. She didn't hesitate, just nodded and stepped out of the room to make the call. And I lay down beside the wristband, nose resting next to it. The smell of it brought back something I'd buried deep. Kandahar, a mission gone sideways, a boy trapped behind a door rigged with wires, the way I scratched at the hinges until someone noticed, the way they almost didn't. I knew then, like I knew now, sometimes the smallest things scream the loudest. Hank looked down at me, eyes tired. "Doggy will find us," he repeated under his breath. That's what they believed. Back in the main office, Sherry had gone quiet. No more justifications. No more excuses about sticky juice or clumsy kids. She sat in the same stiff plastic chair, hands folded tight in her lap, staring at the floor like it might swallow her whole if she blinked too long. "You said this was a compliant facility," Hank said to her, "that you followed every regulation." "I did," she whispered. "No," he said. "You followed the rules you wrote." She didn't look up. CPS agents started taping off the nap room. Yellow lines, evidence markers, flashbulbs from phones and cameras popped in short bursts. Hank stood near the door and looked out into the dusk. A few parents had gathered beyond the police line now, faces pinched with worry. They didn't know what they were looking at yet. Not exactly, but they knew it was bad. A mother held her child's hand tight. The kid clutched a juice pouch and stared up at the building, silent. Inside, I sat by the open floor again. I didn't bark. I just waited. For what? I wasn't sure yet. But the blood in that hollow space wasn't old enough to forget. And neither was I. There are places dogs don't like going. Vets. Fireworks shows. The back seat when the road smells like goodbye. But there's one place worse than all of them. The kind that makes your fur stiffen and your paws freeze mid-step. I've only known a handful in my life. A collapsing tunnel in Helmand. A freight car near El Paso. And now, this. We descended into the hole beneath the nap room just past 8 o'clock. The sun was gone by then, and the outside had turned that bluish gray that settles over small towns when something bad's unfolding inside their borders. We'd widened the square with proper tools, saws, pry bars, a crew that didn't ask questions anymore, just moved like men and women who knew evil when it raised its head. I went first, as always. My paws touched down on concrete, smooth but not clean. It smelled worse than before, like breath held too long in a mouth that hadn't known light in weeks. The room was larger than we thought. 10 feet wide, maybe 12 across, with a low ceiling and no true corners. Just rough patches where the concrete met wooden panels. A single vent overhead let in a faint whistle, barely enough air to keep a child conscious. And in the far corner, lit by Hank's flashlight beam, was a pile of sleeping bags, dirty and crumpled. Most looked too small for grown-ups. Some had cartoon prints. I sniffed near the blankets, sweat, urine, tears, not recent, but not forgotten either. The CPS agent knelt near a wall where scratches crisscrossed like tally marks. She didn't speak, just ran her gloved hand over them, slowly, as if each groove could explain itself if she waited long enough. "Someone lived here," Hank said beside me. "No," said the CPS woman softly. "Someone was kept here." I padded to the opposite side. My tail dropped low, my ears tilted forward. I caught a scent near the baseboard, faint, like skin oil mixed with something sweet. Cherry lip balm, maybe. The kind a little girl might carry in a plastic purse, not knowing yet what it means to keep yourself safe. I barked once. Short. Controlled. Hank was by my side in a second. He knelt where I was standing and pushed against the wooden panel. It gave slightly. "Grab the pry bar," he called over his shoulder. Griggs handed it down. With a few quick pulls, the panel splintered open. Behind it, tucked into a shallow compartment, was a bundle wrapped in an old flannel shirt. Inside were 2 dolls, cheap ones from the discount store. One had marker on its face. The other was missing an arm. Alongside them sat a pink sippy cup, half faded, and a small hospital bracelet with a printed name. Hank read it out loud. L.E.L. Dunham. D.O.B. November 18th, 2020. He froze for a beat. "She's not on any current roster," said the CPS agent. "Nope," Hank replied, standing slowly. "But she's somewhere, or she was." We stayed down there a while. Me pacing, nose close to the floor. The others inspecting walls, vents, every seam in the concrete. I kept circling the center of the room. Something about the shape of it. It wasn't just the smell. It was how the sound moved down there. How every footstep came back too fast, like the room was afraid to keep anything in it for long. That's when I saw the bucket. It sat near the wall, dented and streaked with rust. A fly buzzed around the rim. I walked closer. My breath caught in my chest. I didn't bark, didn't growl, but I did stop. Hank came over, saw what I was staring at. "God," he muttered. There were wipes in the bucket, diapers, soiled cloths, all old, all left as if no one had planned to come back. "This wasn't a temporary hideout," he said. "No," the CPS woman replied. "This was a holding cell." And somehow the silence after she said it was the loudest sound all day. Upstairs the world kept moving. Radios chirped. Officers filed reports. Lena gave another statement, her voice breaking once or twice. The parents had begun gathering in earnest now, lining the sidewalk, gripping cell phones, asking questions that hadn't earned answers yet. One little girl clutched a stuffed elephant and asked an officer, "Why are there so many lights?" "Just checking something," he told her. She nodded, like that made sense, but she kept staring at the building. Back down in the dark, I sat again. Same posture. Same stillness. It's what they taught us. When you're sure, you show it. No flair. No drama. Just sit. Lock eyes. Wait for them to understand. Hank lowered himself to my level. He scratched behind my ears. "You knew something was wrong from the start," he murmured. He wasn't asking. I leaned into his hand because, I knew. There was something else too. A memory from years back. Kandahar again. A compound half destroyed by artillery. A hallway that looked clear, smelled of dust and stone. But I wouldn't move. My handler tugged the leash once, twice. I stayed rooted. He sighed, frustrated. Then the floor gave way. We pulled 3 civilians from that pit. 2 women, 1 child. That instinct never left me. It hadn't dulled, not yet. And now, sitting here beneath a place that should have been filled with crayons and nap mats, I could feel it again. That itch between my shoulders, that knowing in my gut. This was only the beginning. Later that night, after the last of the kids were sent home, and the scene was fully secured, Hank stood near the trapdoor, phone pressed to his ear, listening. He said nothing for a long time. just stared into the dark, eyes tired in a way I hadn't seen in a while. Finally, he pocketed the phone and looked down at me. "You still got more in you?" he asked. I wagged my tail once. That was all he needed. The air changed when the last ladder clanked up out of the hole. That's something I've learned over the years. How to feel silence shift in a room. It thickens when people start realizing the truth's bigger than they expected. It slows down time. Even the dust moves different when a secret's finally found daylight. I stayed behind as the rest of the team climbed up. Hank was the last to go. He looked back at me and asked, "You coming, partner?" But I didn't budge. My paws were flat on the concrete, my head turned just slightly, nose low near the far wall. I hadn't been sure before, but now I was. Something wasn't right about that wall. Not just the smell. It was the air. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. Back in the field, I learned how to tell the difference between a wall that stood and a wall that hid. You could smell it, feel it in your chest. The way sound bounced off it wrong. The way cool air slipped from a seam, trying not to be noticed. That wall was wrong. Hank must have seen it in my eyes, or maybe in the way I planted my body. He knelt beside me, flashlight steady. "You got something?" I barked once. Short, clean. That's all it took. The CPS agent came back down, followed by Griggs and another officer. They ran the thermal reader across the wall's surface, slow at first, then again, faster, when the readings dipped colder than the rest of the room. "Dead air behind it," Griggs said, tapping the screen. "Could be another chamber, or just a cavity." "It's something," Hank replied. "We go slow." They brought in a crowbar and a hand chisel, started at the base. The concrete crumbled faster than expected. The mix was different, newer, lighter, too smooth. "Whoever patched this didn't care about making it last," Griggs muttered. It took them 15 minutes to open a hole wide enough for a headlamp. A gust of stale air hissed out. I growled low, not out of fear, but out of instinct. The smell that followed didn't belong to old concrete or damp dirt. It belonged to panic. Hank held the flashlight in one hand and leaned close to peer inside. "It's a tunnel," he said. Griggs looked over his shoulder. Reinforced, plywood beams, 3 feet tall. Looks hand-dug. CPS knelt beside them. "Where's it go?" "We're gonna find out," Hank said. He looked back at me, and I was already standing. "Of course you're coming," he said, with a half-smile. That tunnel felt different from the crawl space before. This one was narrow, tight enough that even I had to crouch lower. The dirt smelled fresh in places, like someone had been in there recently. Plywood beams lined the sides, some rotting already. Cobwebs fluttered from the corners, but not thick. This place hadn't been abandoned long. We crawled slow, Hank first, me behind, the others spaced out with radios. The ground sloped gently downward, then turned sharp to the right. That's where I stopped. My ears perked. I sniffed. Then again, I barked. Not loud, not urgent, but sure. Hank froze. "What is it?" I moved toward the wall just ahead, sniffing the dirt near the right side. There, half buried in loose soil, was a small metal box. He dug it out carefully, just a lunchbox. Rusted, blue paint, mostly flaked away. When he opened it, we all went quiet. Inside were drawings, crayon pictures, stick figures, childish scrawls. One showed a person in a box under the ground, red lines for tears. Another had the words, "No talking," written in capital letters above a stick figure with X's for eyes. The last one showed a brown dog, big ears, a girl holding its paw. No one said a word. Hank handed the box to the CPS agent. "That's why we're here," he said. The tunnel kept going. Another 30, maybe 40 feet until we reached a wooden grate overhead. Hank tapped it lightly. It echoed hollow. He looked at Griggs. "Can you check where this is, relative to the building?" Griggs pulled out a tablet. "We're no longer under the preschool," he said after a moment. "We're under the old building next door. Used to be a dentist's office, then a church, now abandoned." "I remember," Hank said. "Been vacant since 2020. He stood under the grate, turned to the CPS agent. "Get a warrant. We're going in there next." We crawled back out, slow and silent. No one wanted to say what we were thinking, but I knew. The floor of that daycare wasn't the end. It was the start of a road no one wanted to admit existed, and I had just led them down it. Back at the surface, Hank stood by the cruiser, calling it in. Griggs paced. The CPS agent leaned against the brick wall, arms crossed, staring into the growing dark. I sat on the grass, still breathing through my nose, still smelling the dust on my fur. Then something changed. A sharp wind blew, and I turned toward the preschool again. I saw a figure in the hallway, small, a child. She stood at the far end, behind the glass, just watching. I blinked, and she was gone. Maybe she was real, maybe not. But I'd seen that face before, and I knew she'd been waiting. The warrant came just after dawn. The judge signed it without hesitation. Word had gotten around by then, quiet at first, passed between dispatchers and deputies, whispered at diners over black coffee and dry toast. Something was buried under that preschool. And it wasn't a septic tank. I hadn't slept. Not that I needed much anymore. My dreams these days were mostly fragments. Sounds, smells, dust, a flash of fur. Sometimes in those hours before light, I'd find myself listening for voices I hadn't heard in years. But that morning, I was alert. The building next door was an old 2-story structure with boarded windows and flaking paint. Last I remembered, it had been a church. Before that, a dental office. Maybe something else in between. Buildings in small towns have a way of becoming things they were never meant to be. The lock on the back entrance came off with one pull from the crowbar. Hank stepped in first, flashlight raised. The others followed. I went in ahead of the second team, paws soft on the cracked linoleum. The place smelled like mold and cheap perfume. A rot that had gotten tired of hiding. We swept the first floor quickly. Empty rooms, torn curtains, an old exam chair tipped on its side. The place hadn't seen people in a while, but it hadn't forgotten them either. And then I smelled it. I barked once, short, firm. I led them down a narrow hallway toward what used to be the waiting room. There, against the back wall, sat a sagging bookshelf covered in dust. I sniffed the base. Something wasn't right. I scratched once, hard. Hank stepped in, tested the edge of the shelf. It shifted. Behind it was a door, padlocked. They popped it open. The room on the other side was colder. Tighter, like it had held its breath for years. And on the far wall, lined from top to bottom, were photographs, Polaroids, dozens of them. Each one showed a child's face, some smiling, some not, most with blurred backgrounds. Below each photo, a name scrawled in pen. I felt Hank freeze behind me. "Oh God," someone whispered. Griggs stepped forward, took a closer look. Some of these match our missing persons list from way back, 2009, 2011. There were tapes too. Old cassettes in plastic tubs, journals, binders, a filing cabinet with tags like transfer and reform program. None of it made sense yet, but the air in that room told us everything we needed to know. This wasn't just about the daycare. This was a ring, and it had been operating a long time. I sat in the middle of that room and didn't move, didn't whine, didn't bark. I just let out a soft breath and waited. Because I could feel it through the concrete, the walls, the photographs staring back. There was someone still here. The second chamber was harder to reach. Took another hour to find the right panel in the floor beneath what had once been the pastor's office, a false vent, a crawl space beyond. The smell hit me first, deeper now, human, damp, laced with old fear and the metallic tang of hunger. I barked, hard this time. The team came running. We pulled the panel. Below was another shaft. No ladder this time, just a narrow drop and a dirt floor. Hank went down first, then I followed. The flashlight swept across the room, a pile of old blankets in the corner, a pink shoe, a cracked sippy cup, and then movement, a cough, then another. We froze. Hank called out gently, "Hello? Can you hear me?" Silence. Then a whisper. "Help!" He moved fast, calling for EMS, backup. The trauma team already parked on standby in the lot. I pressed forward, careful, slow. The scent was close now. We found her curled up behind the blankets. Small, no older than 4. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked. Dust clung to her lashes. When Hank knelt beside her, she flinched. But when I stepped forward and touched my nose to her hand, she didn't pull away. She looked up, eyes glassy, unfocused. "Doggy," she whispered. I licked her cheek, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, she smiled. We carried her out on a stretcher, wrapped in soft blankets from the trauma unit. Paramedics moved with urgency but tenderness, whispering kind things she might not hear. The girl didn't speak again. She just clung to the edge of the blanket and kept her eyes on me. News cameras had arrived by then. Parents cried. Officers stood silent, their faces carved from something heavier than stone. When they wheeled her past the tape line, someone pointed. "That's the dog," a voice said. "That's the one who found her." Hank didn't look at them. He walked beside the gurney, hand resting on my back. I kept my head low, ears forward, because I wasn't done yet. Not until we knew how deep it all went. Not until we found out who had built those rooms and who had walked past that girl's cries without listening. But for now, she was safe, and that was enough. For now. We didn't go home that night. Some of the younger officers rotated out. Fresh faces came in with wide eyes and clipped radio chatter. But me and Hank, we stayed. He didn't say it out loud, but I knew why. Some cases you can walk away from, let the paperwork catch up. But not this. This one had roots. They set up a mobile unit just outside the preschool. Folding tables, laptops, warm lights humming over case files and evidence bags. Coffee brewed constantly. Half of it went cold. The rest tasted like ash and old carpet. Not that I drink it, but I've smelled enough coffee left too long in a war zone to know what worn-down humans depend on. The little girl we pulled out, Harper, that's what they said her name was stable. They got fluids into her, heat blankets. She hadn't spoken again, not since that first doggy. But I didn't need words. When I looked in her eyes, I saw something I'd seen before in soldiers, younger than they should have been. Something cracked, but not broken. A flicker. And sometimes, that flicker's all a kid's got left to hang on to. Hank stood near the temporary whiteboard, arms crossed, staring at the growing column of missing names. CPS had pulled every enrollment file from Sunshine Patch, or at least what was available. Some files were gone, others altered, and some were never created to begin with. "What do we know about ownership?" he asked. The county clerk had driven over, still in her cardigan and house slippers. She pulled a binder from her bag, flipped pages with fingers that shook a little. "The building's changed hands 3 times in 12 years, she said. Original owner was a woman named Francine Brewer, opened it in 2011, ran it until 2016. Then she disappeared. Disappeared, Hank echoed. CPS investigation was opened that year. Unexplained bruising on 3 kids. Records say it was dropped. Insufficient evidence. Francine vanished 2 months later. And then, property was sold to a company called Golden Grove Holdings, shell company. No active business address. Leased to a woman named Annabelle Curran. I stood up when I heard that name. Not because I knew it, but because Hank's voice changed. "She ran a different daycare," he muttered. "Bright Pines. That one closed after a licensing complaint. No public statement." "Exactly," the clerk said. "Then in 2020, the building was leased again. Different name, different LLC. New director, Michelle Corrigan." "Sherry," Hank said. "She changed her name for the license." The room went quiet. I sat again, tail curled around my leg. I watched Hank the way only an old dog can. I knew that look. The one that said he'd stopped thinking about the rules and started thinking about the ones who slipped through them. He paced once, twice. "Get me a list," he said. "Every kid enrolled at this facility under every name. Compare it to missing persons, CPS inquiries, and foster placement records. I don't care how old they are." One of the younger officers raised a hand. "That's a lot of names, sir." "Then we better start now." The rest of the night passed in a rhythm, typing, cross-referencing, printing out photos, pinning them to boards, drawing lines with red string like some terrible spider web only truth could walk. They put Harper's photo in the center. Around her, more names. Ellie L. Dunham, Caden Mendez, Juliana Hart, Toby Lang. Some matched cold cases. Some didn't exist on any state record. One only had a name and a crayon drawing left behind in a vent. I sniffed each printout as they came up. Not for scent. Those papers smelled like ink and tired hands. But I studied them anyway. Dogs remember faces, sometimes better than humans do. There were a few I didn't know, but one. I paused at a photo of a boy. Big brown eyes. Same as the kid in the nap room who'd pointed to the floor and said, "That's where the bad kids go." I nudged the paper gently. Hank noticed. "That's him," he said. "Still enrolled, but not seen since last Tuesday." His name was Mason, and he wasn't with his parents. Sherry had claimed he was out sick, but the records said otherwise. By sunrise, the board had 32 names. Hank leaned against the edge of the table, rubbing his temples. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "This wasn't negligence." "No," someone else said. "It was a system." Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rattled against the preschool fence like tiny hands tapping. I walked the perimeter once, nose low. No fresh scent, no movement. But I could still smell the memory of it. The children who had stood here, run here, screamed here. The ones who weren't on any official list. The ones nobody remembered until a dog clawed open the floor. When I came back inside, Hank was alone at the board. He looked at me. Didn't speak at first. Then he crouched, face close to mine. "You didn't just find Harper," he said. "You opened the door to something no one wanted to believe was real." I blinked once. He scratched behind my ear, and then he whispered something only I could hear. "I think they're still out there." And I believed him. You learn to recognize patterns when you've lived as long as I have. Not just scent trails or patrol routes, but the patterns people leave behind when they lie. The silence after a question that should have been easy to answer. The way fingers fidget on paper they claim not to have read. The smell of sweat that's not about heat. It was late morning by the time we made it over to the county records annex. A squat, beige building that smelled like dust, toner, and burnt coffee. Nothing in there had moved faster than a paperclip in 20 years. But that day, something had. We'd gotten a tip from someone in the mayor's office. A whisper, really. Said there was a man yesterday who'd come in asking for all the files tied to Golden Grove Holdings. Said he had a badge. Said he was from CPS. But there wasn't a single CPS investigator in the county with those initials. Hank walked through the door with a purpose in his step. I followed, my paws soft on the tile. The woman at the front desk looked up, eyes tired but kind. She'd seen her share of police before, but something about the way she glanced at me, her breath catching for a second, told me she'd been following the story. "I didn't want to say anything over the phone," she said, motioning us behind the counter. It felt off from the start. "What exactly did he ask for?" Hank said. "All licensing records for Golden Grove properties, building use permits, anything tied to daycares or youth facilities across the last 15 years. "And you gave it to him?" She nodded, looking almost ashamed. "He had a badge. And he knew the right language, knew how to fill the forms. He signed the visitor log ER, but I couldn't find a match in the CPS database. That's when I called the mayor's office." Hank sighed, slow and hard. 3 boxes of evidence. Gone. He took files from 2014 and 2015, including one location we hadn't even linked yet, she added. A building in New Harmony. That name made Hank stop. He looked at me. New Harmony was 2 counties east. I remembered the smell of the place from a training day we did once in their community park. Pine sap, distant cows, rain on dirt. Quiet. Too quiet. The man who took the records had known what he was doing. Which meant the ones behind all this, they weren't just criminals. They were methodical, patient, willing to erase proof before it had a chance to see daylight. We left the records office heavier than we came in. On the way back to the precinct, Hank didn't turn on the radio. The air inside the cruiser was still. Just the low rumble of tires on pavement and the rhythmic creak of my vest strap shifting with each breath. I sat up, nudged my head into his arm. He glanced down. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Back at the station, we found a surprise waiting. Jenna, the assistant from Sunshine Patch. She was sitting on the bench outside the building, clutching her phone, a paper coffee cup beside her, untouched. She stood when she saw us, eyes red, but steady. "I remembered something," she said, before Hank could speak. "I think one of the kids left something behind. In the toy chest. I wasn't supposed to open it, but I think it might still be there." Hank didn't waste time. "Let's go." 15 minutes later, we were back inside that nap room. The toy chest sat beneath the same window, rainbow still painted on the lid like nothing had happened. I stepped closer, nose twitching. The scent was faint. But there, Jenna opened it, hands trembling. She reached under the books, past the stuffed elephant, and pulled out a laminated bracelet. "Hospital ID," she whispered. Hank took it gently, read the name. Caden M. DOB, February 3rd, 2017. Admit date, May 12th, 2022. He turned it over. Scrawled in bright red crayon were 4 words. "Doggy will find us." No one said a word. I moved beside him and sat. He knew what that meant. The case wasn't over. The tunnel didn't stop beneath that building. The lies stretched farther than we thought. And somewhere more children waited. Quiet, hidden, forgotten. But not by me. Never by me. There's something about certain scents, how they cling. Not to fur, not even to memory, but to something deeper. A part of you that never quite goes back to the way it was. That was how Caden smelled. Not the hospital band, not the crayon. Him. He had a warmth in his scent, like peanut butter and grass and a little salt from tears. I'd never met him, not face to face, but I knew him the moment my nose touched that bracelet. I knew he was scared when he wrote that, but I also knew he believed in me. Doggy will find us. Not someone. Not help. Me. We left the daycare and didn't go back. At least not that day. Hank was already on the phone before the cruiser door shut. "Get me anything tied to a boy named Caden M., born February 3rd, 2017. Cross-reference hospital admits, foster placement, emergency relocations. I don't care if it's redacted. Pull it." We drove straight to New Harmony. The town sat quiet under a sky full of bruised clouds. Just 2 gas stations, a bar that hadn't had a liquor license in a decade, and a library open only on Thursdays. But right at the edge, down a gravel road just past mile marker 12, sat a building that wasn't supposed to be there. A squat, cinder block structure. Windows blacked out. A sign above the door that read, "Hope Steps Youth Retreat." I growled before we even got out of the car. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was memory. Something in the dirt around that place didn't want me close. And that's how I knew we were getting close to the truth. A man opened the door before we even knocked. Clean-shaven, tall, wearing a pastor's collar that sat too crisp for comfort. "Can I help you folks?" Hank held up his badge. "We're following up on a CPS inquiry. You the director here?" The man nodded. "Pastor Eli Monroe. I've run Hope Steps for 9 years. What's this about?" "We're looking for a boy. Caden. He might have come through here." Pastor Monroe didn't blink. "We don't keep children. Just help transition them. A few days at most. And do you keep records?" "Of course." Though some were damaged last winter during the flood. "Convenient." Hank looked down at me. "You picking up anything?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I walked straight past Pastor Monroe, nose low. He started to say something, but Hank raised a hand. "Don't. He knows." The smell inside was layered. Pine cleaner trying too hard. Mold in the walls, dry cereal, sweat. Beneath it all, something sharper, like fear trapped under floorboards. We passed an old office. A classroom with 5 desks. A sleeping room with mats lined wall to wall. And then I stopped. 3rd door on the left. Padlock on the outside. No window. I scratched once. Hank reached for the bolt cutters. Pastor Monroe stepped forward, voice rising. "You can't just—" But the lock was already snapped. Inside was darkness and quiet. Then a rustle. Hank's flashlight flicked on. The beam landed on a small figure curled in the corner. Thin arms, knees drawn up. A faded hoodie 2 sizes too big. He didn't move at first, until I stepped in. He opened one eye, then the other. Then slowly, like waking from the deepest sleep, he whispered, "Doggy?" I whined low, pressed my head to his hand. He didn't cry. He just wrapped his fingers into the fur behind my ear and held on like he thought I might vanish if he let go. Hank radioed for backup, said something about immediate medical, about protective custody. I didn't hear the rest. I just stayed with Caden, not moving, not blinking. He had a scar under his eye, faint, old, but it told me everything. He'd been here longer than they claimed, too long. When they carried him out, wrapped in a rescue blanket, I walked beside the gurney like I always did. Not guarding, just staying. Because when a child writes your name in crayon and leaves it in a box of broken toys, you don't leave until they're safe. The town of New Harmony didn't make the news that night. It didn't matter. What mattered was the boy with peanut butter in his scent, who'd written a promise I didn't even know I'd made. And somehow, still believed I'd keep. I did, but I knew it wasn't over. Because Caden was just one name on a list that kept growing. And the ones who built these places, they were still out there, still building, still hiding. But so was I. And I never forgot a scent. It rained the day they shut Hope's steps down. Not a hard rain, more like a whisper, steady and gray. The kind that soaks through your coat, slow enough you don't notice until your bones feel it. I didn't mind. Some part of me welcomed it, like the earth was washing off what that place had tried to keep hidden. They came in unmarked vans and city cars, not sirens. Quiet, professional. Hank said it was a coordinated extraction. But I knew better. It was a rescue. There were 5 more kids inside, some older, some barely able to speak. They didn't run, didn't cry, just blinked at the sky like it had never looked that open before. I stayed near the youngest, a boy named Isaiah, who wouldn't let go of the bedsheet he'd wrapped around himself like armor. When I sat beside him, he touched my tail, then my ear, then leaned against my shoulder and exhaled. I don't think he knew what safety felt like until that moment. Neither did I. The building was sealed off by sundown. Red tape, chain-link fence, armed guard at the lot entrance. But even with the locks, it didn't feel done, because the records were still missing. The man with the badge who wasn't CPS, he'd been tracked to a motel 2 towns over. But by the time local law got there, he was gone. Room scrubbed. Laptop fried. Not a fingerprint left behind. They found a burner phone in the trash. No contacts. Just one saved text. We moved to Auburn Ridge next. Buildings ready. Same cover. Hank read it aloud and swore under his breath. "We've been chasing ghosts," he said. This was never about one daycare, never about one town. The board back at the precinct had grown too big for the wall. We'd moved to 3 whiteboards, pushed together like a puzzle. Each pin was a town, each string a child, each thumbtack a scream someone hadn't heard until too late. I'd memorized them all, because I could smell the pain in each picture. The way the paper edges curled as if they'd aged a lifetime in days. Back in my corner, I watched as Hank stared at the newest report from state records. It was stamped urgent in red ink, the kind they only use when someone finally listens. He didn't look up, just spoke like he was saying it to himself. They used tax-exempt religious fronts, shelters, retreat programs. Half of them never even registered their kids, moved them across counties so records didn't match. All legal on paper, but nobody ever looked underneath. He rubbed his eyes. "Until you scratched the floor, huh?" He turned and smiled at me, tired. Well, but real. That night, we drove to Auburn Ridge. No warrant, no press, just us. The place was still under renovation, fresh paint on the siding. A truck out front marked Little Grove Christian Academy, opening soon. I walked the perimeter before Hank even got out. Something in the dirt was wrong. It smelled new, but too new. Like they'd tried to cover something. Bleach, maybe. Lime. But those things don't fool a K9. Not for long. I led him to the back lot. A shed had been poured into fresh concrete. Foundation still wet around the edges. Hank knelt beside it. Knocked twice. Hollow. We circled the building twice more. No sound. No lights. But my body told me what the ground refused to. There were kids under there. Maybe not alive. Maybe not yet. But they'd been there. The next morning, Hank filed for a judge's order. He didn't wait. By lunch, 3 unmarked units arrived. The concrete was torn up by dusk. And beneath it, under plywood boards, they found the room. No blankets, no toys, just a row of handprints pressed into the concrete before it dried. Some small, some barely big enough for my paw. No names, no files, just memory. What the walls remembered. We catalogued everything, photographed every inch. And that night, before we drove away, I sat alone by the edge of the field. The others packed equipment, talked logistics, but I stayed quiet because I'd seen this before, in a different country, under a different sky, places where the innocent disappear and the guilty rewrite history. But I wasn't a man with a badge or a pen. I was something else, something quieter, something relentless. And the ones who thought they could bury the truth in concrete forgot one thing. I could still smell it. Some stories don't end. Not really. They echo. They leave their shape in the air like a bell just after it rings, quiet, but still moving through you. Mine was never about glory or medals. I didn't wear a cape. I wasn't the kind of hero people wrote songs about. I was just a dog who listened, who watched, who stayed when others left. It had been 4 weeks since Auburn Ridge. The operation had been shut down. National news picked it up for a cycle and then moved on. Politicians made statements. Task forces were formed. But I didn't care much for the noise. I cared about the names, the ones we still didn't have. 37 children had been accounted for, but the list was longer than that. Too long. Some didn't have last names. Some only had nicknames. Bunny, Red, Little T. But I remembered them. Not by the names they were given, but by the way they looked at me when the doors opened. Like I was the first thing that hadn't lied to them. I carried those looks in my bones now. We'd been reassigned, Hank and I. Not punishment, just distance. The higher-ups said we were too close to it, too invested. Maybe they were right. So we took quiet work, missing persons, search and locate, cold trails, the kind of work that didn't make the news but still mattered to someone. We were called upstate, middle of December. A foster home reported a girl missing. Said she ran off after a nightmare. Hadn't been seen in 3 days. Thin file. Just one blurry photo and a first name. Maylee. It snowed the whole drive up. Hank didn't talk much. Neither did I. We didn't need to. By the time we reached the woods near Pine Hollow, the light was falling. Too dim for a drone. Too quiet for shouting. But not for me. I caught it under the cedar trees. A scent so faint it could have been a memory. Sweat, dirt, something sweet, maybe fruit snacks in a hoodie pocket. But it was there. I followed it through the drift. Hank let me off leash. He trusted me by now. A half-mile in, I found her, curled under an old hunting blind, half covered in pine needles, face pale as paper. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't gone, but she was close. I nudged her once, She blinked. Then she smiled. "You came," she said. I lay down beside her and pressed my side against her ribs. She was shaking. I gave her warmth. She didn't say much else. Didn't need to. By the time Hank got to us, she was already holding on to my collar like it was the only thing keeping her on this side of the world. He crouched, whispered, "You found her." But I already knew that. What I didn't know, what none of us knew until the hospital, was who she really was. Maylee wasn't her name. Not her real one. She'd been taken at age 3. Her file had been marked inactive, presumed deceased. But she'd survived. Through 3 placements, 2 name changes, and a system that failed her every step of the way. But she remembered me, not my name, not the vest, but my eyes. At the hospital, when she was finally stable, she asked for me. Hank brought me into the room, quiet, gentle. She was in a gown too big for her, surrounded by stuffed animals and a warm light that made the room feel safe. She didn't smile this time. She just held her arms out, and I stepped up, resting my head against her chest. "I knew it was you," she whispered. "The dog from the nap room." I pulled back slowly, looking into her eyes. It was her. The first child we found. The one in the tunnel. The girl who whispered "doggy" with her last breath of strength. She'd been moved again after the raid. Lost in paperwork. Moved out of state. Lost again. But she'd waited. For me. I stayed beside her that night. Hank sat in the corner chair, eyes closed, but not sleeping. The machines beeped. Snow ticked against the window, and I felt it. This ache, slow and deep. Like maybe this was the end of something. Not the story. Just the part I needed to tell. She slept with her hand on my paw. And in the morning, when the sun rose soft and gold through the hospital glass, she smiled like she wasn't afraid anymore, like maybe the worst had passed. And for once, maybe it had. That was the last case I ever worked. Hank retired the same month. He said the job had changed. I think it was us who changed. Now I live slow. I wake with the sun and stretch like I've earned the day. I still dream sometimes, of tunnels and handprints, of voices in the dark and children who believed in dogs more than people. But mostly, I remember her, the girl who waited, and how, against every odd, she was right. I did come back, because that's what I do. I find the ones who are forgotten, and I stay, until they know they're not alone anymore. If you're still here, thank you for walking this path with me. Not everyone listens to stories like mine, but maybe you did, because you felt something like it too. Just type 1 in the comments if you've ever held on to hope, even when the world went quiet. Sometimes that little number says more than words ever could. And if you want to sit with me a little longer, there are more stories I still remember. Some painful, some strange. A few even end with light. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to hear them, one by one as I remember. No rush. I'll be right here, waiting. Until next time, stay kind and stay listening.